Alright, is everyone ready? Everyone ready? Yeah, okay. Begin on my first word. I affirm, resolved, the United States ought to substantially reduce its military presence in the West Asia and North Africa region. Department of Defense defines substantial reduction as 50%, official guidelines prove, DoD-02. Substantial reduction is defined as a decrease of 50% or more in total funding or quantities. Military presence refers to the totality of U.S. military power in a country, blessed with Article 97. Presence of the totality of U.S. power deployed overseas. The value is morality. It's the most relevant value in this debate because of the word ought in the resolution, which indicates a moral obligation. The value criterion is maximizing expected well-being, consistent with utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is the single best way to understand morality. Happiness is a common currency, we constantly strive to achieve it. Every single question about experience can be devolved to trying to avoid pain or achieve pleasure, Green 15. Going back to morality, you've got all these different tribes with different values. What can they do to get along? You have to have some kind of common metric. Utilitarianism provides a kind of common currency. Decision makers should regard everyone's interests as equal. If you start with anything you value and you say, why do you care about that, and keep asking, you ultimately come down to the quality of someone's experience. If I were to say, why did you go to work today? You would say, I need money. I need a place to live. Why can't you just live outside? It's cold. What's wrong with being cold? It's just bad. At some point, if you keep asking why, it's going to come down to the pleasure and pain. A good standard for resolving disagreements is to say we should go with whatever option is going to produce the best experience, which you could think of as maximizing happiness. Contention 1 is democratic backsliding. Subpoint A is terrorism. Heavy involvement post 9/11 killed U.S. credibility and caused more anti-American sentiment, polls show, Ashford 18. Osama bin Laden was among the critics of America's regional presence, justifying terrorist attacks with a narrative of resistance to occupation. He accused the U.S. of occupying the lands of Islam and called to kill Americans until troops withdrew from Saudi Arabia. Military involvement helped popularize this narrative. Polls show a decline in favorability towards the U.S. in every Middle Eastern country. Turkey declined to 19%, Egypt dropped to 10%. Empirics prove Virgin 07. After the invasion of Iraq, globally there was a 607% rise in attacks and a 230% rise in fatality rate. Withdrawal empirically creates political stability and allows for better actors to solve terror. Brownlee, November 27, 2023. It is difficult to overstate the level of stability Afghanistan has enjoyed since 2021. Political violence plummeted by 80% in the first year after American forces left. The Taliban security forces curbed the threat of mass casualty attacks by the Islamic State, accomplishing in months what the Pentagon has been trying to achieve since 2015. If the Taliban can hobble Islamic State's operations, the armed forces of Syria and Iraq can be equally effective. The Syrian military has the capabilities to deal with ISIS. Withdrawing military presence solves terrorism. Other non-military options are more effective and avoid terrorist blowback, Pillar at all 20. The foremost driver of anti-U.S. terror has been U.S. presence. Research has shown the chief purpose to be resistance to military occupation. U.S. President Saudi Arabia radicalized bin Laden. The single most important step to reduce terrorism is to draw down its military presence in the Middle East. Militaries are not effective against terror. Terror organizations are not fulfilled by military ops, but by policing and intelligence co-op. Military inflicts collateral damage on innocent civilians, a source of anger and resentment that feeds extremism and terrorism. Addressing extremism will require other counter-terror tools. These include law enforcement, intelligence, blocking financial flows, and diplomacy. Terror caused the U.S. to lash out and want it, perpetuating wars and instability, which are also the root cause of terror, Morgan 01. Terrorist acts reactivate nationalistic sentiment. Because the enemy has been named, the situation becomes emotionally volatile. Another spectacular attack could easily radicalize the U.S., where racial prejudices as no more than a pretext to burst. An isolated attack of madness becomes the pretext for war. Fear will unleash hatred, flinging missiles indiscriminately towards a supposed havens of an unseen enemy and on the other side. The threat of terrorism throughout the developing world destroys future economic growth. Investors can't expect a positive return on investment and aren't interested in terror-prone countries, Sefi et al. 20. The main goal of terrorist activities is economic instability. By creating insecurity, conflict will increase the uncertainty of return on assets. The most important factors is the absence of terrorist activities. Terrorist incidents provide opportunity for capital outflows. Multinationals avoid investing because of instability caused by terrorist attacks. Terrorist incidents increase pessimism about future returns, stimulating capitalists to withdraw. Terrorism increases global insecurity and has a negative impact on capital. Terrorism has a significant impact on foreign direct investment. Terrorism accelerates outflow through risk, anxiety, and capital maintenance costs. Subpoint B is authoritarianism. Anti-U.S. sentiments in the Middle East provoke religious extremism, democratic backsliding, and authoritarianism, Choi 11. U.S. military intervention increased terrorism. U.S. military intervention becomes counterproductive. It leads to a cycle of political violence. Exaggerating civilian and collateral damage done by U.S. soldiers, authoritarian leaders may invoke nationalistic feelings against the U.S. Authoritarian leaders project U.S. military intervention as unjust interference. State-controlled media help centralize the image of U.S. military, provoking moral backlash. U.S. military intervention provides an opportunity for authoritarian leaders to strengthen their hold on power. Authoritarian leaders portray U.S. military intervention as a form of political violence. They can easily manipulate public opinion. 63 terrorist incidents that were considered to be a reaction to various U.S. military interventions. Authoritarianism leads to extreme dangers, Belfield 23. Totalitarian states would be more war-prone, less cooperative, and inhibited to progress. It would increase the risk of extinction. A world dominated by them would be worse at responding to risks, more likely to have major wars. Miscount might be a problem. War makes extinction likely. This is bad for all risks that require cooperation, such as pandemics or climate change. Totalitarian states inhibit social progress. We should be concerned about bottlenecks, where there is a risk of locking in. Future technology such as space settlement, life extension, and or much later surveillance could enable lock-in. A totalitarian dominated world risks extinction. Regional contention 2 is regional conflict. Extremely recent evidence proves the United States military presence has raised the risk of regional conflict while not achieving any of its goals. It also deteriorizes relations with allies, forcing the turn to countries such as Russia or China, removal of troops at the best of both worlds, Cavalier 1124. Military presence may aggravate regional tensions and raise the risk of miscalculation and provoke conflict. Forces end up triggering an escalatory spiral rather than preventing one. Attacks by Iranian proxies mounted if the United States augments its presence. But neither appear to deter U.S. adversaries. Military presence raises provocation. It gives hardliners to Iran and proxy groups a rationale to continue military buildup and threat escalation. The U.S. military could undermine relations with key allies. Partners may be turned to Beijing or Moscow if they find cooperation too troublesome. Most forces should be withdrawn. Deployments feed rather than deter escalation by Iran. With less involvement, the U.S. would reorient its policies towards diplomacy. This would mitigate regional security risks and cause escalation by the U.S. military presence. U.S. presence in the Wana region emboldens allies to go to conflict, withdrawal solved till 20. Without Americans to watch back, behavior could improve significantly. Military adventurism, the type that produced a humanitarian disaster, and Yemen would be less likely. Presence also emboldens adversaries, Jones 11. Surrounding Iran military and putting it under the constant threat of American military action strengthen hardliners and convince it that the best path to self-preservation is through militarism. We'll skip the last card. So I'm ready for cross.
Okay, good. Can you just read the Jones evidence?
The last one, yeah. Jones 12, I didn't read that.
Great. Starting cost now. Let's first talk about the empirics evidence about the Burkina 7 evidence about how terrorism increased after invasions. Invasions are military interventions, which is different from military presence. So how is this relevant to the debate, especially when the evidence is from 2007?
Okay, so while we would agree that military intervention and military presence are still bad, it still proves the fact that the U.S. going into the region increased terror attacks.
Okay, the U.S. going into the region increased terror attacks. What evidence proves that the the United States leaving would make terror attacks just go away?
So we can look at the Brownlee 23 card as well, or the Brownlee 1127 card, as well as the Pillar 20 card, which talks about how empirically, for example, in Afghanistan.
Well, this evidence says that ISIS went down because the Taliban took over Afghanistan and drove ISIS out. Just because one destabilizing terrorist organization decides to fight another one does not mean that it's a good thing that one terrorist organization now has complete control of a country. I don't understand.
Okay, it was not just ISIS. It says the card specifically talks about how political violence in general plummeted by 80% in the first year after American forces left. It's not about whether or not another place, another terrorist organization took over the country. It's just about the fact.
Okay, do you think Afghanistan is in a good state right now? The Taliban literally runs the country. It's full of human rights abuses and is a collapsing economy with collapsing governance.
I mean, we would say it was collapsing just the same when the U.S. was there.
To the same extent, you would say?
I mean, it was still collapsing. We were there for 20 years, nothing really improved. We just kept fighting them.
Yeah, and then it did collapse when we left, and the Taliban took over, right?
Right, but it's I mean, we don't have any evidence about how good the situation in Taliban is. Our evidence is specific to political violence and terror.
Okay, sure. Let's talk about the authoritarianism argument. You say that the anti-U.S. sentiment promotes authoritarianism. How does this happen? Okay,
so authoritarian regimes radicalize their people by using the U.S. as this threat. They say look, the U.S. is here. We need to fight against them. But they radicalize their people through.
Why would this be solved because it's only a substantial reduction in presence? Do you defend removing all U.S. troops?
We defend 50%.
50%. So 50% of U.S. troops are gone. There's still 50% there. So why can't authoritarian regimes just say yeah, there's still 50% here. There's still a threat to us, and use that?
Well, I mean, there's a substantially less threat.
Okay, but it seems just the perception of having U.S. troops there is what allows them to construct these threats and incite extremism. So I don't see why any reduction that's not a complete elimination would solve this, as long as there are troops there for them to point to.
I mean, it's very well, we're not the AF doesn't claim perfect solvency. We're not saying we make a perfect world. What we're saying is we make the world better. Authoritarian regimes won't have the ability to leverage U.S. presence as much if there's substantially less military presence there.
Okay, that makes sense, I guess. That's just cost. Okay, it should be in there. How many words everyone sees it?
I see it. What's the order?
3 off in that case.
Okay. Is there an order on case, or is it just top?
It's gonna start on the framework, and then it's gonna just go like the credentials.
I got under.
Second.
Oh, wait, 1 second.
Yeah.
No, this is the
that's
first
the
one.
episode.
Oh, how I got
Go.
my number.
You should go back to the speech Dropbox page.
I think I'll Excuse me 1 second.
I'm gonna type this out.
Apologize.
So it's this one?
This one.
If you want to show up as a PDF or like a file, yeah.
Done.
Is everyone good? Okay. Post off interpretation at all TUC bid distributing tournaments, debaters must disclose the formats to the opponent in some way at least 30 minutes before the round. The violation screenshots in the doc prove they sent them an email after they flipped off and they never even responded. Also, so on the wiki it says that they put the email on the wiki for disclosure, which proves that you should definitely be able to meet this. You definitely should have met this. The standards one fairness if an informant is not enough to create a comprehensive or competitive ordinance which deems the neck sensors afford to infinite prep skew that forces us to split the time we run between different possible apps, and we have no idea what the ODC would be, which encourages supply seconds and misdisclosure. Prep skews outweigh. It controls the quality of arguments and interactions, which skews the outcomes of the round. 2 is education. The 30 minutes of prep is key to in-depth clash and gives the neck enough time to actually research the app and find out genuine points of clash. Anything else forces the neck to
Can I
generics.
request that you slow your speech?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. I can request that, yes?
Yeah, we're not supposed to interrupt. and
Oh,
no
I
one's supposed to-
apologize.
Okay. Yeah, I'll go slower and you can just like say slower.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Sorry. I'll just start at the generics point.
Great.
Yeah.
We'll catch you from there.
Which forces the neck to generics, which creates stale and repetitive debates will inevitably skew towards the affirmative since they have infinite time to pipe out generics. 3 is safety, not disclosing or responding to emails and leaves debaters in the dark about what the app is, and disclosure is key to safety requests or accommodations and ensuring that the app isn't triggering in some way. Their model forces debaters to out potentially traumatic experiences and creates a toxic environment in which debaters just ignore each other. Safety is a voter, it's a prerequisite because nobody would engage in the space if it wasn't safe in the first place. Voters, fairness is a voter. This is all off the dock, by the way. It controls the internal linked education because if arguments aren't fair, then there's no way to engage and gain education. Also, all arguments resume fairness because you assume that the judge will evaluate them fairly, and it's a constitutive debate since it's a competitive activity which requires a winner and a loser. Flipping before rounds, disclosing docs and tournament brackets all proof for education is a voter because it's one of the benefits of debate, and it's the reason why schools fund debate. Use no RVIs that don't win for being fair. It's illogical, and logic controls the internal link to the evaluation of arguments. Also incentivizes baiting theory and then winning on the counter interrupt, which incentivizes more bad norms. Use competing interrupts instead of reasonability. Reasonability encourages a race to the margins of what counts as sufficiently fair, which incentivizes the most abuse possible, which creates most models and judge intervention since there's no consensus about what is reasonable, and it incentivizes judges to intervene based on what they believe is the next best thing, which takes the round out of the debater's hands. Also, competing interrupts is the best because it leads to the most fair model. Since we debate between competing models, use a norm setting model. It's the best because it solves long-term abuse, whereas in-art abuse only matters one round at a time, and you need to win reasonability to win in-art abuse because in-art abuse questions the reasonability of the abuse that happened in the round, which means that it controls the internal link. Also, use drop the debater when there's nothing to drop. There's no argument to drop on disclosure, and drop the debate is key to norm setting because it ensures that people will actually meet norms in the future because it's not worth risking the loss, and drop the argument is illogical under a norm setting model because we're not punishing abuse but voting for the better norm. Next to NC, I value morality but ethical internalism is true. One is epistemology, A1 is equality. Externalism incorrectly assumes that certain individuals have stronger epistemic access to moral truths which justifies the exclusion of those individuals as the creation of ethics. B1 is inaccessibility. There is no universal character for moral judgments that is epistemically accessible since every argument for existence presumes the correct normative starting point. Mark of vote is 14. We should not assume that some of us has special epistemic access to what matters. According to externalism, some of us may be motivated by what happens or be wrongly motivated, but that cannot offer no explanation because that doesn't appeal to what they're actually trying to justify. Some people may be trying to form true beliefs about the sex of chickens, but they have independent means of truth. And two is motivation. Externalist notions of ethics collapse to the internal because the only reason why agents actually follow external demands is because the demands are consistent with their internal account for the good. Motivation is a necessary feature to ethics because normativity, since they only matter insofar as agents actually follow through on an ethic that is generally B1 is empiric, is no factual account of good since each agent's motivations are unique to them and there's no conversion between differing beliefs in a unified ethic that requires realism. The prisoner's dilemma comes first to two parties, given two parties that cannot trust one another. It's always the most rational option to choose to violate the other one before they can violate you. If they strike you first, then they'll be much more to lose than risking just committing violence against them. Skip the rest of that. B1 is violence is constituted to the human condition. Hagler 06, the notion that non-violent violation is on the other is based on alterality, but it assumes that the other is not violent. In return, a dream that the community could without violence is a dream of excluding anyone that does not want to engage in the same ethical relation. It's supposed that the ethical dream is unethical in its own terms since it eliminates the alterality. Deconstructive logic in violence is not prevents one from criticizing social injustices, but exposes the contradictions in the doctrines and eliminates exclusion and discrimination. Is a constitutive condition that requires the sovereign of power to enforce rules and prevent the state of nature. Parish 05, the sovereign's job is to be the ultimate to find out pieces only possible of ambiguity and disagreement are eliminated. The sovereign is to provide unity through the terms of people which they conduct their lives. The purpose is to diffuse an imperative class construction with which humans would fall into violence at the natural condition. Thus, the standard is to consider with the will of the sovereign before on responsibility. Skip the first point, but culpability. The sovereign is the authority for punishment, which ensures that agents are actually held culpable for their actions and deter violations, preventing them from committing unjust acts in the future. Moral responsibility is a side constraint on ethics. The only way to determine how the only way to ensure that agents actually follow through on ethical principles, which is the point of having them in the first place. That's not contend that the United States does not have an obligation to substantially reduce military presence in the West Asian North Africa region. What is responsibility? Constructivism demands aiming to ensure that the most people possible, are included under ethical system. A point is skip the first point, but B point is obligation. Individuals who believe that they have correct system are obligated to survive that system. Otherwise, the ultimate good can never be achieved. And it would all disagree forever. That negates military presence is aimed at increasing influence and decreasing lawlessness. JS 15. U.S. military continues to protect and promote shared interests. The presence in key locations underpins the international order. They're working to strengthen institutions aimed at fostering stability, peacekeeping, and countering extremism. And two is hegemony. The U.S. military presence is how it establishes itself as the international sovereign capable of established conditions for possibilities of peace. And 6, the peace is best security for countries huge relative power. Absence of a hegemony it promotes anarchy and produces anarchy and war. Peace is last so long as the hegemon is powerful enough to punish those who do not obey. Weaker states do not dare to challenge the stronger state because the stronger state has no reason to be forced. A shift of the equality of power is likely to increase the likelihood of war because the challenger will not be satisfied with this existing order. Military imperial opponents of the United States is Japan. The United States military based in 36 countries which meet the American troops are present around the world and the control of most important regions, including the oil resource of American hegemony, prevents a global war. And as the international sovereign, the United States does not have external obligations since they create the moral truth. Even if you persuasively argue that your framework is correct, you cannot generate a normative force of obligation and means the status quo is good because it is what the sovereign will. Skip the rest of the arguments. The pick. Counterflex, the United States after substantially reduces military presence in the West Asian North Africa region, except for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Substantial means across the board. Homeland 13 substantially limit means must occur across the board, and the plan causes a perception of abandonment, which leads to a shift away from the U.S. across the region. So, Lawrence 23, pulling out of 22. Pulling out of Saudi Arabia would be easy, but costs immense. The spawning of a counterflex facility security partner native abandonment countries to turn to Russia and China. Footprint in the Saudi Arabia leads to U.S. interests. We shoot ourselves in the foot if we pull out. Consensus of experts and Saudi officials agree that your perception of U.S. security is the only determinant of whether or not Saudi government is to construct CFR aid. The only factor in whether or not the Saudis would be the perception of U.S. security guarantees a high U.S. diplomats with the access to Saudi decision makers expressed little doubt Saudi Arabia believe that the U.S. would not protect them. They would respond to perceived decline in relatability by pursuing a nuclear deterrent. Saudi Arabia should not underestimate the ability of Saudi to buy tech. The understanding of Pakistan regarding nuclear weapons, they have common interest in complementary assets. Pakistan has nuclear ability but limited money, but Saudi has no capability but even limited money. They have the capacity to obtain nuclear weapons, and months they choose not to because the countries do not view them weapons as necessity. These countries question the reliability of the security umbrella. Almost certainly reassess the mounting the perception of the most intense incentive. The senior Saudis would rely on the U.S. have the most pressed. The Saudi officials kindly state that the SAG would obtain nuclear weapons and rely on Pakistan for buying parts. Skip the rest of the card. Nuclear war. Sanders 23. Saudi Arabia acquiring would be dangerous. The proliferation increases the risk of nuclear war when Saudi Arabia would try to usher the nuclear weapons use only for deterrence. Ukraine demonstrate the problems with the deterrence theory, but on a flawed premise of leaders will always act rationally, clearly communicating their intention to the adversaries to respond accordingly, according to the possibility of human error. Abstract understanding about the risk of nuclear war will likely again, and the consequences fail. Induction failed because there's no logical certainty that what happened in the past will happen the same way in the future, and any inductive reasoning just proves that induction is circular. Consequences fail because there's infinite stemming consequences which just stem on to infinity, which makes the predictions impossible. possible and they're evaluative of end states, which means that any action will be permissible and that it can't actually guide action. Additionally, the usual argument makes no sense and concedes to internalism because people only fall love pain and pleasure because they think that it is good internally, but different people have different conceptions of pain and pleasure, and Massaget's prove that it's not universal, which means that it's externalist and fails, which means you should prefer internalism. I didn't read any of the questions.
Can you send the marked doc?
Yeah.
I'll start cross after that, sir.
Okay, it's
Okay. Starting cross on my first word. What is ethical internalism?
Ethical internalism is the idea that agents create ethics from internally, basically. Every agent has a different account of what they think is morally correct, and they all determine that through internal sort of obligations and things like that, which means everyone has a different conception of ethics, and that's sort of how people determine what they're going to do.
Okay, so basically people don't know, like, they have their different ethical systems, so we have to, like, follow what the sovereign tells us. What if the sovereign, like, commits genocide? Is that just okay?
We would say that's not okay for the sovereign to just commit genocide, and when that happens, the people should revolt if the sovereign is illegitimate and is not
Okay,
like.
why is that not
actually
okay though?
defending
The standard is just consistent with the will of sovereign. We're just consistently whatever the will of the sovereign wants.
True, but there are like limitations on what the will of the sovereign like is, or whether or not things are sovereign. Like there are such things as illegitimate sovereigns, like governments that are not actually.
Okay, what's an
able to
illegitimate
fulfill.
sovereign? What do you define as an illegitimate
An
sovereign?
illegitimate sovereign is something that is not able to fulfill what the framework wants the sovereign to fill, which is basically to.
Okay, what does the
prevent
framework
state
want the
of
sovereign to fill?
nature. To prevent the state of nature.
Okay, but the Nazis prevented the state of nature. Are they legitimate?
Well, we would say that the Nazis did not prevent the state of nature in a lot of ways because they like incited large amounts of violence and instability. Took
Okay,
over.
under
countries
the
and then
Nazis,
made
was Germany in a state of nature?
I mean, we like Belgium, Germany, probably not until later points in the war. At which point, the
Okay, at
people,
what
like,
point were
turned
they in a
against the
state of
sovereign.
nature? Can you even define what the state of nature is?
Yeah, sure. The state of nature is when there's no sovereign to actually
Okay,
enforce
and
rules
were the
implement-
Nazi governments the sovereign?
Yeah, I mean.
Okay,
we
so
could
then
say
there
that
wasn't
you
a state of
could argue
nature
that
and it
they
was a
were.
legitimate government.
What?
So then, okay, if you're defining a state of nature as a state where there is no sovereign, and then the Nazis were the sovereign, then the Nazi government was a legitimate government.
I mean, at a time, you could claim that they were. We would say that when people
Okay.
like turned against them, that they would be an illegitimate sovereign, and then
So
people
okay,
have
so it's
right to
only when the
vote
people
them.
turned against them.
Yes, and
Okay,
also
didn't
when
the
they were
Germans
voted in
support the
state of nature.
Nazis like generally? Like didn't most of the Germans like were on board?
I mean, you could make that argument. I think that most Jewish people probably didn't support the Nazis.
Right, but would you say that generally most German people supported the Nazis?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know that much about World War II, honestly.
Okay, sure. Okay, you read all this induction fail stuff. Doesn't the AF rely, or doesn't the neg framework also rely on the fact that like the state of nature is bad? Like, isn't that
I mean, it
consequentialist?
says that the state of nature is constitutive to the human condition and is constitutively bad because we say that ethics are a good thing and the state of nature prevents that. Like the state of nature is sort of like
But don't
intrinsically opposite.
doesn't that rely on previous examples of the state of nature being bad?
I mean, I would say not the state of nature.
Okay,
like,
then how do we know the state of nature is bad?
because the negative framework argues that intrinsically what should be happening is a cohesive moral framework or a prevention of the state of nature insofar
Cool.
as
How do we know the
ethical
state of
rules
nature
are
is bad?
enforced. Because it prevents ethical rules from being enforced, which is like the state of nature. That is the bad thing because it prevents agents from actually being able to interact with each other.
So under the sovereign, people can't interact with each other?
Well, people can't interact with each other in a way that is like peaceful.
Do people kill each other under the sovereign?
No, that's why the
They-
sovereign exists.
Okay, so there's no murder in the U.S. right now.
Well, I mean, it's not like the sovereign is a perfect thing, but it would say without the sovereign, things would be much worse.
All right, that's time. I'm gonna plug in my computer, then I'll start. Running prep will start. Wait, no, it won't. Running prep will start now. Okay, that's prep. Also got the doc. Once it saves. Okay, it's the same name. I believe the one error should just be at the bottom. The one is at the top. Yeah, the one error is at the bottom. Okay.
What's the order?
It'll be one new off. Yeah, one new off. Then it'll be the aft case, and then we'll go top down and like. Okay. Actually, no, scratch that. It'll be one new off, disclosure. Yeah, one new off, disclosure, top or AC, top down the neg. So the hobs and the pick. Okay. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Opponent ready?
Yeah.
Okay, starting my first word. So first, new off. Picks are voting issued a reason to reject the team. They steal the AF and base competition off unspecified parts of the plan. The AF can never win because of the neg can't shift the debate's goalpost, kills fairness and substance to education. They don't disclose the shell. We're going to go for reasonability on the shell. Reasonability with the bright line of all of his offense arguments have a link and impact turn ground. Prefer A, ensures reciprocity between layers, which is the only objective metric for determining fairness. B, just means you can make an argument on substance rather than having to read theory, gets which is better since it takes less time to win. Then on the judge intervention. Bright line solves this since they can make an objective metric of valuation. Also, if I lose my bright line, evaluate as a competing model of debate, which means you have to weigh your interms against the disadvantage to reading the shell. Then on norm setting 1, we can debate whether interms are reasonable, which is side constraint to fairness. Unreasonableness to interms skew the AF, which outweighs the abuse on the shell. 2, norms are self-justifying. We care about norm setting for fairness and education, which begs the question of the bright line. 3, reasonability encourages you to defend norms we actually think are necessary, which eliminates the view as a frivolous, which means the judges are less opposed to think on it. And then there's just no abuse story on the shell. They only email me. I put my phone number on my wiki. If you didn't get an email back, you should have just texted me. I just don't check my email. Most high schoolers are not checking their email on a daily basis. If I didn't respond to email, you could have contacted me, but the fact that you didn't means you were just trying to get a cheap shot off the win. You don't actually care about disclosure. And then they could have also just photoshopped the email. How do we even know this email is real? Which means it's impossible to even evaluate the ability to on the story on the shell because the email could just be completely fake. So then on the AF case, they would have just dropped the entire AF case, but we'll extend it here anyways. So extend the first contention. There's 2 key points on the first contention. First, extremist terror. The first one is terror. Extremist organization use the presence of the military power to gain their own power. They see the U.S. and they say, look guys, the U.S. is here. They're on our land. We can look back to Osama bin Laden, who directly was quoted saying that the U.S. was a major influence in him gaining power power and allowing to recruit more people to the movement, which encourages these attacks. The impact of this is a more war and economic decline. Countries, investors don't want to invest in like developing countries when there are a bunch of terrorist attacks because they know they're not going to get a return on development. That locks in traps in these developing countries. The second key point was authoritarianism. The warrant is very similar. Essentially, these authoritarian governments use the U.S. military presence to say, look, we need to radicalize, you need to like give us more power so we can defend against the U.S. This is empirically proven, and you can look at the Troy Levitt card for this. The impact of this is more a totalitarian, authoritarian governments, which is going to lead to increased risk of extinction because they will not cooperate, they will not do social progress on extremely important things, and they're more likely to go to war, which is the terminal impact. Then let's say in the second contingent, there was also two key warrants here. One, it forces countries like Iran to militarize. When you see these military bases near their ground, when they see all these troops in the region, they feel like they need to militarize in order to protect themselves against this impending threat. When you get rid of the impending threat, they don't have any reason to militarize anymore. They don't have any reason to escalate in the region. The second point was entanglement. Essentially, when the U.S. is in this region and a war breaks out, they get entangled within said war and then make it worse. So none of this was responded to, which means we're winning all of our impacts. So the first big impact is the terror and economic decline, and the second big impact is the increase in conflict in the region. Those are both going to outweigh on magnitude, scope, and probability. So first, the most probable impacts in this round. You can see conflict happening because of U.S. military presence and these terror attacks happening all the time. You could also see entanglement happen before, like with the Israel-Hamas conflict. So then on their induction fail stuff, this was the only response on the framework, essentially, but the NEG framework relies on consequentialism as well. Otherwise, we had no idea the state was dangerous, it was bad. And they also dropped in the entire case. You can literally just vote AF right now. We know these impacts are bad. There's no reason to vote neg. Then, on the Hobbes framework, law is not morality. The government is not always right. Pekena 02. When it's related to law and morality, they're not the same. You cannot equate the two. Just because something is immoral does not make it illegal. Just because something is illegal does not make it immoral. Then, Hobbes collapses utilitarianism. 1. Explanatory power. A. Hobbes can't explain why the pain and the felt in the state of nature is bad, but util can, which makes it the best because it assumes util. B. Hobbes can explain why a social contract is good. Only util can, since it removes the pain from the state of nature. 2. Trade-offs. The state must calculate for trade-offs, and some hurt and benefit others inevitably. Hobbes doesn't give a clear weighing mechanism for discerning, but power util does. Then, prefer after util framework. The neg standard justifies the sovereign doing anything they want. Under their framework, the Holocaust was okay because it was the will of the sovereign. They said in cross-ex that the Nazi government was legitimate at some point. That literally greenlights genocide as long as there's still a sovereign. And the sovereign doesn't do anything because it doesn't even solve for murder. We'll skip the next card, then we'll pick. The U.S. could just move troops to Saudi Arabia post-AF plan. We leave 50% of the presence, which means they can move to Saudi Arabia to stop prolif. And Saudi Arabia will not proliferate. Global Times 1216. Saudi Arabia and Iran continuously improving relations. Saudi Arabia and Iran are actively trying to explore cooperation, expand changes in various areas. Saudi Arabia and Iran express commitments to the Beijing Agreement. China and Saudi Arabia and Iran all express concerns over Gaza. That means there's no impact to that.
Okay. Okay. The order is gonna be like the theory debate, so the shell and picks bad, and then what's it called? The framework, and then the pick. No new doc. Is everyone good?
Can you repeat the order again?
It's gonna be the theory debates, like the disclosure shell, just like the paradigm issue stuff,
Oh.
then the picks bad stuff, then the framework, and then the pick. Okay, good?
Yeah, the signpost.
Yeah. On the disclosure shell, not going for concede reasonability and in-round abuse means that it should definitely apply to one-year theory as well, considering that they haven't made any arguments as to why one-year theory should specifically be competing in terms of no setting on this argument, which means that if you think that one pick isn't that bad and they could still engage in the NC strategy, then you should feel comfortable not voting on it. Independently reject one-year theory. It's incredibly AF biased because the 2-year gets to line by line every single AF standard with new responses that never gets responded to, which means that they inevitably win every single round because they can always win offense, which means if we have some of defense or enough line by line on the shell, then you should just then you should not feel comfortable voting on it because it just explodes the debate. Independently, it was also a 3-line blip in the 1 AR and was literally 10 seconds. You shouldn't feel comfortable voting on new arguments, and if your perception of an argument changes from the 1 AR to the 2 AR, you shouldn't vote on it. The picks debate pop-up first off, counter-interpretation debaters may lead picks the prefer 1-1 testing picks are crucial to testing the affirmative from multiple different angles, including those that are difficult to respond to. It encourages nuanced discussion of counterpoints as opposed to generic answers that are key to in-depth discussion, and encourages better AF writing, which solves the abuse. It is also a crucial aspect of negative strategy since it's unlikely that the resolution was ever 100% true or false, so specifications are key. This answers the arguments about unspecified parts of the AF being competition and shifting the goalposts of the debate. If that was the issue, then you should have just read a spec AF, or your plan should have been better if Saudi Arabia wasn't a key to it, or you think the competition was illegitimate, because obviously these countries are not all the same, which is another net benefit because it allows more nuanced testing, because not every single country in the region is the exact same, and putting them all together in the plan and then acting like us picking out certain ones that are better or worse to have military presence in is a bad thing. Just reduces topic education, which is incredibly important. As you said, saying topic education now is fairness, also Negron, the Neg needs to strategically go out parts of the affirmative, otherwise all of their impacts will always come first, and they just get 100% weighing it on all of the largest impacts, and there's no direct way to shield the links. They can always just say that the case outweighs when we read a dissent, and a dissent is always an implicit part of the pick, which means that you would have to prep for it anyways. The topic literature, almost all the topic literature on Jan-Fed flows from very particular systems that negate, which requires picks, otherwise the app would win on leveraging the app being more significant to more support from experts, otherwise the neg is just forced to generics every single round, which obviously on the shell proves that we would lose, because generics mean that the affirmative has an infinite to 4 prep advantage, and on their standards proper, that all of it being your fault, all of it is your fault for not specifying correctly, which was done above. And again, you should just hold the line on this, considering that they made a big deal about the arguments on disclosure. Also concede no VAs, which means you can't vote on disclosure. There was no independent voters being made on the line, which means we will concede that the Hobbes framework is false, but it's not an independent reason to drop us. We will concede that it is a bad framework, but it does not mean you should drop us, and there's no reason that it's an independent voter, especially when it's not in the 1 AR. The pick. The pick, it is incredibly easy to vote on the pick, considering that there's no solvency deficit made and no explicit permutation in the 1 AR, and the net benefit was functionally dropped except for one card that is literally terrible and not in the context of any of our evidence. Extend the pick proper. The pick proper. The United States also substantially reduces military presence in the West Asia North Africa region, except for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The whole definition solves any competition arguments, because substantial means across the board, which means all countries in the region. Saudi Arabia is one of the countries, which means they would have to reduce presence in the region, which is important because the Lawrence evidence specifically isolates that any reduction in U.S. troops would lead to a perception-based narrative of abandonment. It's incredibly good on this. Says that pulling out even a small number of troops would seem easy, however the costs are immense because it has a narrative of abandonment, which means that any new 2 AR arguments about how we don't pull out everyone is incorrect, because this is a perception-based link, which means any reduction triggers the impact, because it makes them feel unassured and makes them feel like the U.S. security umbrella is uncredible, which is what the CFR evidence says. This evidence is great, much better than any of their evidence, and far better, and was literally completely dropped, which means that the net benefit should be incredibly easy here. The consensus is that literally the only reason why Saudi Arabia is not proliferating right now or creating nuclear weapons is only because the United States assures them with boots on the ground directly and security assurances with the security umbrella. That is what the Lawrence and CFR evidence says, which has just been conceded, so I shouldn't have to do too much work here, but it is actually great on this. It says that the only factor from multiple Saudi officials, they have said that the only reason they are not buying nukes, acquiring nukes in the status quo is because they feel they do not need to do that, because they feel that the United States presence in the region is sufficient for them. But if we start to take it away, they see the narrative of abandonment. Even if we don't take enough away to actually cause them to lose security, then it still seems like a narrative of abandonment, which was the perception argument in the Lawrence evidence, which they conceded. That means that Saudi Arabia would proliferate because they have close ties with Pakistan, which has nuclear weapons and wants more money, and would be willing to sell them to Saudi Arabia because they don't have nukes but have infinite money, which means that they would buy them. The only reason they haven't, again, is literally because of the United States, which is in the evidence multiple times. It's actually incredibly good on this. The net benefit. There are evidence is far better than the specific to Saudi Arabia acquiring nuclear weapons and what would happen if it increased nuclear risk, which is the standards evidence and the CFR evidence. Their evidence is terrible. It is in the context of Saudi Arabia and Iran having close relations. What does this have to do with the internal link to proliferation? The internal link is that Saudi Arabia buys weapons from Pakistan because it doesn't feel assured by the United States, and it feels like it is at risk. Iran and Saudi Arabia cooperating does not mean that Saudi Arabia does not feel any less at risk. It is one country in the region, and also Iran and Saudi Arabia cooperating is generally not good. Iran is literally one of our adversaries, and the United States has officially come out and said that it is a rogue state. One of our allies starting to get really comfy with them is not a very good thing, and we should have security assurances in the region to ensure that they don't want to build up nuclear weapons with Iran, because then double proliferation would be worse. Independently, Control F, the word prolif in the code nuclear weapons, it never says it anywhere. It just says that these countries are together and that they're worried about the war in Gaza. What does this have to do? Our evidence is far better and says that Saudi Arabia would buy nukes from Pakistan if the United States was not there assuring them, and that is the only reason why they did. Now, the framing issue, the net benefit has been, we've won the net benefit, and the fact that it solves all of case because there's zero solvency deficit made in the 1 area means that it solves 100% of cases. There's no reason why Saudi Arabia is specifically key to have solvency, and it solves all of cases because it's just a small region. You should hold the line because there was literally no argument made in the 2 area. The last argument was that we can bring our troops back, which doesn't make any sense because that is obviously just becomes the pick, because putting our troops back into the region would just be the pick, and also it is a perceptions-based link, which means if we take any troops out, then it would obviously then it would trigger the link because they perceive us as taking troops out even if we put them back in, and it's post-plan changing the plan, which is obviously intrinsic, which is bad because the path can just add on infinite things to solve the net benefit independently. This wasn't an explicit poem. Doesn't make any sense because it obviously just either becomes the pick or is against the affirmative, and there's no solvency deficit. The net benefit was 1, which means it's an incredibly easy negative ballot on the pick.
Okay. We'll take prep starting now. So order will be the affirmative and then the pick. Half kiss and pick. Okay. Alright. Alright, everybody ready?
Yeah.
Alright, point ready. The key thing that should be framing your ballot in this debate is the fact that they did not respond to the AF case within the 1 and C or in the 2 and R. It's completely conceded. They're going to try to make this argument that the pick solves the AF case, but there was zero implication of this in the 2 and R. They kind of just stand up here and tell you that we didn't make solvencies within the 1 AR, and this pick just magically solves case, but there's no implication. You shouldn't feel comfortable voting on this pick if you can't actually explain to yourself how it solves case. We'll implicate why it doesn't anyway. So it's just not the AF plan. The AF plan requires this substantial reduction in order to get rid of this perception. It's all about the fact that this presence is there, which is causing these governments to actually which causes these extremist organizations, authoritarian governments to actually cause this problem. So if you keep some of this, if you keep still the majority of the presence by leaving the president in Saudi Arabia, it's obviously not going to solve for the AF case. They're going to try to say this wasn't in the 1AR, but it's literally just it's in the case. It's the 1AC. It's not, because the pick is not the plan, it can't just solve for the AF magically. There was zero implication in the 1A, there's zero implication in the 2 and R how it does. So they also did zero weighing or implication, there was also zero weighing in the 2 and R. We have no idea what this nuke war impact even means. We don't know how it works, and there was zero implication on how it even happens. They didn't extend their link chain on the nuke war impact. They just kind of said that our evidence is better and they're gonna get nukes and they're gonna proliferate and they're gonna start nuking people. But if you can't actually ask yourself, if you can actually explain after the round how that's gonna happen, how are you gonna even vote on this impact? It makes zero sense. We'll get to that more on the case side of the flow, but that essentially means we're gonna win all of our impacts. So in the first contention, that's gonna be the key 2 points of terror and authoritarianism. So first on terror, essentially these terror extremist organizations leverage the U.S. presence to create to recruit more people because they use this as a common enemy in order to fuel their things. We can look to the quotes by Osama bin Laden that leverage the U.S. presence in order to radicalize people. The authoritarianism link is going to be very similar. Essentially, these authoritarian governments say that the U.S. is here, so we need to give us more power. They use media organizations to radicalize their people in order to get more power, which is going to spread authoritarianism. So even if you're buying their extinction impact from nuke war in the 2 and R, we also have an equally big extinction impact from the authoritarianism cards. You can look to the Belfield 23 card that shows how authoritarian governments and increased authoritarian governments leads to less cooperation over existential risks like pandemics, climate change, and all those other things, but also could lead to more wars, which make extinction more likely. That means we're literally just simply winning on these impacts. There's zero implication in the 2 and R. There's zero reason why the pick solves case, which means they literally cannot solve for any of our impacts we read in the 1 and C. And because they didn't actually put any defense or turns within the 1 and C on case, that means that there's zero reason you can vote neg here. We're winning all of our impacts. And then we'll move on to the pick on the on the pick. So the biggest thing in this pick is that there's literally just no impact. They're going to give you this prolif impact, but you're going to want to look to our Global Times card. They're going to say that it doesn't show any solvency, but it is showing solvency because Saudi Arabia is actively looking towards more cooperation with other countries, and they're not actively looking prolif. They're not going rogue because they're actively cooperating with other countries and entering agreements, which means they're not going to proliferate. You're going to prefer our card for a few reasons here. First, it's way more recent. Our card is from December 16th, while their card is just they didn't really give a date, but we can assume that our card is more recent, so they just said 23, so it's probably early in the year, which means you're preferring our evidence on recency there because it's going to show what Saudi Arabia is doing now, and their impact is just completely unlikely.
Good.
Good debate.